In the previous episode, we resolved all the technical issues, installed the air suspension, and did a full test drive, which showed that everything was assembled reliably and works perfectly. And that means we can move on to the next stage which Kolja took on.
It seems like everything is ready and we can start the next stage. This means taking everything apart, finishing the welding where we hadn't finished, painting where we hadn't painted, and assembling what hadn't been assembled.
It's all very straightforward here. Initially, we installed all the components in test mode, tested them for a long time, figured out whether they worked or not and whether we were satisfied with them. That's why most of the embedded parts and structures were attached with tack welds, since we had to redo and move things more than once. Now we can confidently say that everything is in its place, works perfectly, and we are completely satisfied.
There's nothing left, everything was removed. And during disassembly, more issues came up. For example, I shouldn't have welded this tube here. We couldn't remove the PDM cover, but that just means we'll have to improve it. Otherwise, that's it. The frame is ready. There's nothing left on it. Well, except for the doors, they're still there. And here's a whole pile of spare parts and components.
Before installing the parts and components in their places, we need to prepare those spots. That's exactly what we started doing. First of all, we weld everything that was previously tacked in place.
I welded the entire main frame everywhere we hadn't finished before. I also welded all the work areas. Now it's time to clean everything up. We ordered all sorts of materials from the guys at G2. We're gonna clean all of this up. Fiber discs, flap discs, a whole box of goodies. We're gonna try everything out and learn as we go. Maybe along the way we'll introduce you to some of it too.
The next step, after thoroughly welding everything, is to clean up the seams and prepare the surface for priming. That took a whole day of work. The next day, we bring the prepared frame into the paint booth. But in our case, it's a very makeshift paint booth. It would probably be more accurate to call it a priming booth. Before priming, we thoroughly blow everything off and degrease it. Then we apply the black primer. Jumping ahead a bit, I'll say that we used up quite a bit of it. 6 liters, but the transformation is visible right before your eyes. And the plain greenhouse made of metal profile turns into a nice looking body.
So guys, yesterday when I was degreasing, I realized that it's best to degrease and paint in 2 stages. We'll paint the top first degrease and paint the top and then the bottom. Because if I degrease everything, I'll still end up working on the bottom and getting it all dirty. That's why yesterday I painted the top, and today I'll calmly paint the bottom.
The next day, as you understood, we finished priming the lower half of the body. The next step is to move the frame to the final assembly location. From here, it should be ready to drive off properly. At this point, you're probably wondering where those 6 liters of primer went. Well, here's the complete answer. In addition to the main frame, we have dozens of additional extra parts that also need to be carefully primed, which is exactly what Kolja has been diligently working on.
It's now time to assemble our truly big and exciting construction set for little Adulsa fantastic remote controlled toy, indeed. Everything has already been painted well, almost everything. We probably forgot some small things, but we'll deal with those as we go. All the major components have been painted and prepped. Since the car was already running, everything was steering, braking, opening, clicking, everything was working. This is already the final assembly, so we're gonna get started. I think some questions or issues might come up along the way and we'll handle them as they arise. All right, let's roll in the axle. We'll probably start from the bottom with the suspension and gradually start attaching everything piece by piece.
And after that, we'll just follow the planned steps. First, we worked on the suspension, which conveniently was already attached to the rear axle. The next step is the air suspension. We're assembling everything that was taken apart for painting, putting it back together like a construction set, piece by piece like a puzzle. Here are a few more thoughts about the project. In fact, over the past year, the overall picture hasn't really changed. And of course, that's not particularly interesting for the viewer. And honestly, it's also tough for us mentally, constantly working on something and not seeing any significant changes. But now we can definitely say that we've finally gotten things moving. A huge amount of work is behind us and is being successfully completed. After all, we've built a fully functional electric car. Yes, there were some nuances and difficulties, but it's done. Next, we have simpler, more straightforward work left to do. And most importantly, it will be something you can actually see and appreciate. According to the plan, we'll completely finish the exterior in the next 2 episodes, and then all that's left is the interior. That's also a clear, relatively simple task, so in the foreseeable future, this project will be finished as well. I think definitely within this year. The next and final piece of the puzzle is the batteries. In the previous episode, we assembled them into 2 large blocks that fit perfectly along both sides. After that, we tested them, made sure everything works great, which means it's time to secure them permanently. But first, we covered the boxes with plastic to create a sealed structure. We measured, cut the plastic to the required size, and started assembling yet another construction set. Once all the panels were fitted, we painted them black. In the end, we glued everything with sealant and thoroughly siliconed the joints. After a day's work, we have 2 of these black boxes left to be installed on board. 1 jack, 2 accomplices, and it's done.
Next up was glazing our van. We still haven't fully decided what exact thickness of polycarbonate sheeting to use for the windows. We decided to start with 6 mm. We bought 1 sheet, it's transparent. We'll tint and mirror it later. We got half a sheet of 6 mm and it costs quite a lot for a piece of plastic. Now we'll try to mount it on our greenhouse. For now, we're temporarily attaching it with self-tapping screws to see if we're satisfied with the thickness, to check if there's any vibration or anything like that, and we're hanging it up.
In the end, we put the 6 mm polycarbonate sheet on the body, looked at it, felt it, and decided that it's still a bit too thin. But since it's already in place, we decided to immediately outline the dimensions and shape of the arch. A couple of marker strokes. And once again, we removed the failed glazing.
We decided that the 6 mm sheet wouldn't be rigid enough after all, so we went with the 8 mm one. It seems like just 2 mm more, but in reality the sheet is much sturdier. It's very springy and heavy. We took the whole sheet, 2 by 3 meters. Previously, we measured with half a sheet and we had to make a joint. It fits perfectly within 3 meters, so we'll skip the joint and just make a fake seam, just draw a black stripe there and it'll look nice. We need to measure the sheet on the car again, but it's incredibly heavy too, people can't hold it, so we're just using the old template for now. Half a sheet of 6 mm. We drill the holes. We'll drill where they're supposed to be. And to get it right the first time, we hang the sheet on the car, then we trace the entire perimeter. We cut paint and install it on the car.
And here in fact is why we marked up the previous sheet that didn't fit.
We'll drill this hole so we can hang it on the car. We already have it on our car. And here's another one. We'll drill this one too, just in case, because the sheet is really heavy. It's very hard to hold it in place even with 2 people.
In the end, we settled on 8 mm solid polycarbonate. Don't confuse it with plexiglass, they're actually different things. The guys are fitting that very polycarbonate. It's the same process. First, place the sheet against the side, marked, took off and started cutting.
We carefully cut our polycarbonate to the correct size, then hung it up for an initial test fit, and now we have the next important task ahead. The specific places where it will be glued need to be painted with something black. The frame it will be glued to and across this entire width, the joints. we need to apply something black in the right way. As for the technology of gluing polycarbonate to metal, it probably doesn't exist, so we'll use the automotive method used for installing windshields. But there's a big but. Automotive glass is glass in the truest sense. But in our case, it's plastic solid polycarbonate. So with regular glass, you just apply the adhesive without any special preparation and stick it on, but with plastic, you need to prepare it somehow. I have a few ideas. We'll improvise and thoroughly test out the method I came up with. So polycarbonate is kind of greasy. It needs to be properly prepped. For that, we'll carefully sand it. I took a few samples. We'll glue them together and see if this made-up method actually works. If everything works out as planned, that's the plan. We'll do the car, sand it down. I took different grades of polycarbonate. To figure out what kind of scratch we need, we'll use sanding pads, Scotch-Brite, and a fine abrasive sponge like 240 or 320 grit, which gives it a light matte finish. I think it creates a good scratch pattern for adhesion. Why don't we just paint this whole perimeter with primer? Because that would be a major deviation from the method. It is applied with a pad in one thick wet layer. It dries instantly because it has a nitro base. And if, when we're applying it with the pad, the first layer starts to dry and we go over it with a second layer, the second layer immediately dissolves the first one and it cracks. This is about the technique. We can't use a roller or a pad to paint such a large area as we need. Applying it with a spray gun or paint sprayer would be absolutely wrong. Let me repeat, it has a very volatile base, it evaporates very quickly, and when spraying with a gun, it will already be dry, not a wet layer. I think that's unacceptable in this technique. We'll paint the perimeter with a regular black automotive base, and then, or rather, on top of the black base, we'll apply the primer. You can also use an accelerator, but then you end up with a 3-layer sandwich. I don't think it's worth making things that much more complicated for us. Our base has dried. Now we apply the primer, wait for a minute, and then we glue our samples together with glass adhesive.
But while we wait for the test results, there's time to prepare the polycarbonate. First of all, we thoroughly sand the edges, the ones that will be visible in the future, and the marker serves as a guide coat. A couple of hours of sanding, and we can move on to the next stage. Now we need to mark the areas that will be in contact with the body. We marked them, cut the protective film, and started removing it around the perimeter.
The polycarbonate is protected on both sides by a protective film, which really helped us with masking. Instead of taping around the entire perimeter with masking tape, we just did it carefully. We used a knife to trim the film so as not to damage the polycarbonate. When necessary, we remove the film. Now we're scoring, matting and painting with the base coat all at once. And then when we peel off the protective film, the part we need will remain clear and the part we need painted will be painted. Before painting, we degrease the surface, but we all know that plastic is very static. Polycarbonate especially so. All sorts of dirt sticks to it, so regular degreaser won't work. You need a degreaser with an alcohol base and anti-static effect. Otherwise the paint job will be, to put it mildly, bad. A lot of dust and debris will settle on it. You also need to degrease carefully, don't rub too hard the surface. Because when we rub too hard, what do we create? Static. let's start applying the base coat. We added 5% hardener to the base for extra strength. Next, we need the thinnest possible layer so that when we remove the protective film, there won't be a noticeable step and the edge will be neat. Because if you apply a thick layer and cover the entire area, when you peel off the film, that thick layer will crumble and the edge will look messy. That's why you need the thinnest possible layer. Just enough for color, and carefully spray at low pressure. A day has passed. Our samples have already bonded, and now it's time to check how well it all holds. Here we just have polycarbonate with primer, not sanded or anything. Surprisingly, it holds better than I expected. The glue stayed on this surface and on this one, and inside it's still wet. Well, kind of. It holds, I'm surprised. The polycarbonate wasn't sanded, meaning no scoring was applied to it. I'm really surprised. For some reason, I thought there would be no adhesion at all. And these two samples here, on one side, it's painted glass with primer, and here it's just primer on polycarbonate. Let's see now if the paint with primer will come off. Same story. The glue stayed here, but apparently not much time has passed and the glue inside is still wet. The adhesion is excellent. In this case, the issue is that not enough time has passed. It seems more time is needed for it to bond inside. It didn't come off the glass. The paint didn't come off the primer. Excellent. I've already made 2 samples just like this one. So the method works, and we'll do the same with our large piece of glass. We'll lightly score the base with a sanding pad before applying the primer. We'll stick spacers here, little soft bushings, about 1 to 3 millimeters thick. They're needed so that the glass doesn't come into contact with the metal. It's specifically to create space for the adhesive, so it doesn't get squeezed out or completely flattened. As for tools, we have this old grandfather's caulking gun. And with these tubes, we need to apply more than 10 meters. The seam is done with this kind of adhesive. That's why we turned to professionals, so the guys would come with professional tools and quality adhesive. They applied it all and did it very beautifully and reliably. We peel it off from both sides. This is how it looks from this side. And stop. Turned out to be a really pretty good thing indeed.
In the end, we asked professional glaziers to help us apply the sealants, and while the guys are working on that, here are a few more thoughts about the project. The Loaf from the future is the first car project on the channel, and it started just for fun. Of course, it's a miracle. We'll never be able to register it and drive it on public roads, but that was never the goal. After 2 years, we've grown, and of course now we probably wouldn't take on a project like this, because it's really painful to spend a couple of years, invest a ton of money and nerves, just to end up with a monument in the garage. But abandoning the project halfway would be at the very least unfair to you. That's why we are firmly determined to finish it in the foreseeable future and to do it as properly as possible, even though the car will just sit in the garage. And at best it'll be taken out on a tow truck to some events. From the start, we understood that the body needed to be slightly curved, so we made the base in this shape. Otherwise, it would definitely look like a greenhouse. So now, the polycarbonate sheet takes on the shape of these elements, and overall, the plan worked. But these are the simplest elements. Unfortunately, there are other elements on the body as well.
Now, it's truly time for the light but complex and intricate elements. Why light? Because here is just a strip. But it needs to be curved, and at the front, our sheets also need to be bent. Across the entire width of the van, that's 2 meters, and we have no experience bending polycarbonate at all. Obviously, we need to somehow gain this experience, maybe watch something on YouTube, but for now, we'll try to bend this sheet ourselves, just using 2 heat guns. It's clear that this method won't work for the front part, and maybe even the heat guns won't work either. I'll Google at what temperature polycarbonate bends. We'll see at what temperature it starts to boil from the heat gun and how it behaves. Whether we'll manage to do it or not, we'll find out later. What have we learned? It's actually quite easy to bend such a thin, narrow strip. And it doesn't start to boil because of its thickness. You can see that heat capacity builds up there because when I tried to bend thin strips, they would start to boil very quickly and easily. This one didn't start to boil at that width. Obviously, we need it to be about 10 times wider. Well, there's a definite chance. We absolutely need to try it, and we also really need to carefully peel off the protective film, because if we don't, the film starts to boil and leaves behind a sticky, gooey glue, which will be very, very hard for us to remove later on. So let's try again. An interesting observation: when you heat polycarbonate from this particular side, it actually bends in the completely opposite direction by itself, and in this precise way you can effectively straighten it out. If you heat it from this side up to the point where it becomes quite pliable, you can already start gently bending it. And what I particularly liked is that with this specific heat gun, I wasn't able to make the plastic boil, which is actually a very good thing indeed. Well, it did eventually end up boiling after all, but that was from a really serious overheating. Still, it became quite easy to bend. Here are the bubbles. It started to boil. I tried measuring the temperature with a pyrometer, but since it's a transparent material, I don't know, the reading shows 120, but I think it should already be 142 or even much higher, because that's what I think the heat gun does.
It blows at an incredibly high temperature, approximately 500 degrees Celsius, which is a significant factor in our experimental process. We will now proceed to try it with a specially prepared experimental piece, carefully selected for this particular test. Here, we have meticulously fixed it in place from above, utilizing robust screws to ensure its absolute stability and prevent any movement during the operation.
So now we're heating it from above and watching how it heats up and whether it's possible to do this.
As you can see, overall the technique works, but there's always a but.
We've gained our first experience. So we bent it crookedly and terribly like this. What we realized is that with a heat gun, even with two heat guns, we couldn't heat up this width. A gas torch heats much better, but it's very easy to overheat it with one. With the polycarbonate, we had support here and here, but in the center there was a gap, so it's clear that our plastic sagged in the middle. Now we're thinking of taking a 1.5 millimeter metal sheet, covering this bend and trying to bend it again with this setup so that we don't have a sag in the center. So we'll have a metal sheet here, which we'll cut off later, and then we'll heat it, still using the torch.
We're moving forward according to the plan. We cut the metal sheet, cleaned it up, and tagged it in place. In the end, it became clear that even this strip couldn't be heated evenly, and accordingly bent properly. Not to mention the main opening, which led us to a decision. Not to waste time on this and to bend these elements in the large chamber, which is what we'll do in the next episode.
Now we're going to fit the polycarbonate glazing sheet for this front right door. As you remember, we spent a long time playing around with it. We were looking for hinges that would work for us. In the end, we used concealed hinges here, which don't stick out. Next, we made locks, which are currently removed, and we made the lip for the rubber seal. Now we'll put on the rubber seal and fit the door back in place. There's no real need for front doors. That's because there will be a single captain's chair in the center, which will rotate 180 degrees. The idea is that the rear and side doors will be enough for us, but we won't weld the door shut, we'll just bolt and glue them in place. Polycarbonate. So if later on in practice we end up not liking this idea, if it turns out to be inconvenient, nothing will stop us. We can just make the doors functional again. That is, we would just need to cut the polycarbonate sheet right here in this part. but in principle, maybe we won't even need to. And then come up with some kind of mechanism for handles or for unlatching the door. Since handles probably wouldn't fit in here, that would be if we go with the second plan, and that would be impractical. For now, we're just sealing up the door. As for the idea of cutting the front doors, here's another thought. Let's say we open the wheel door, we have huge ground clearance, it's really big. A step really seems necessary here, but there won't be one because it doesn't fit the design and concept of the car. So you'll have to lift your leg up really high to get in through the center. We have a captain's chair installed, which can rotate on its axis, even if well, it will be turned this way when the driver is getting in, but it still won't be very convenient. So that's more or less how it's going to look. Let's say the seat turns this way and you sit down. Well, it's not the most comfortable experience, even considering that the seat can rotate and you can get in from there. And the second option for the driver to get in, meaning a healthy person. Carefully climb up the steps and enter the cabin. And then we settle into the seat like royalty. We turn the seat to face forward, although really, who's gonna stop us from driving in reverse with a joystick, sitting with our back to the direction of travel?
Exactly. No one's going to stop you from driving around the workshop like that. According to the plan, today we need to finish glazing both sides, which you can see on the screen. Following our well-established process, we cut the polycarbonate to size, cut out the arches, gave everything a good sanding, and finished off the visible elements and the edges of the sheets. By that time, we had already painted the black stripes, applied primer, then sealant all around the perimeter, and finally put up the finished sheet stoves with a simple shape. Here's what we have as of today. Now you can really see some results and progress, and it's clear that there's not much left to do. So patience to you and to us, thank you for watching, and best wishes from Topper.